In today's episode, just pluck a string, despite me warning you? I hope you've budgeted new speakers then. I can't drive anywhere without permission? Okay, I'll follow that rule, maliciously. I am not allowed to drive the rental car. You got it. So let's get started. Just pluck a string, despite me warning you? I hope you've budgeted new speakers then. This one stems from 10 years ago. Back then I was called upon to sit in as a bass player on a recording session for a Mersey beat-influenced song for a singer-songwriter, SSW, who was still forming a touring band. The SSW had a certain sound in mind, which needed a really fat vintage bass tone that was used in the 60s, and I happened to have the right tool for the job, a Gibson EB2 from the mid-1960s. So I got a call since the SSW heard I had that bass, and asked if he could loan it, or even better, if I wanted to play on the session. It was easy money with no further obligations, so I agreed. So I arrived at the session with my bass and chord cheat sheet, and noticed everything was already installed, so it was plug and play. Nowadays, a bass line is recorded as a double track. The signal from the instrument is split, with one line going straight into the mixing console, and the other one is going through an amplifier that has a microphone. Then when mixing the song, both signals are blend so you have articulation from the direct line, and character from the mic signal. So I took my bass, tuned it, silently, with a clip-on tuner, plugged it straight in the amp, twiddling the knobs to get a fairly neutral sound, making sure I first put the master volume at 0, and then slowly up. Meanwhile the recording engineer, RE, that day tossed me an extra cable and junction box that I needed to place between my bass and the amplifier, so he could run the clean signal straight in the table. That RE had a bit of a pretentious air surrounding him, pretending to know it all, better, and bossing the musicians around, belittling them at the same time. He took a look at my bass, rolled his eyes and said that a modern music man would be better suited, and was more versatile, instead of that old hag that probably sounded like a turd. The old hag Gibson EB2 was a very popular bass back in the 1960s, but nowadays it has faded a bit into obscurity. It's a one-trick pony, but it absolutely excels at its sole trick, producing absolutely gargantuan levels of low-end frequency. Don't expect any clarity, articulation or finesse from it. It sounds like a wet fart coming from the anus of Satan himself. On top of that, it has an extremely high signal output, dwarfing even the output of active instruments with onboard amplifiers. The pickup responsible for that all has earned a nickname of its own, the Mudbucker, because all it does is producing mud. Back in the days, those Gibson EB basses had a reputation of being able with normal use to fry any loudspeaker within minutes just by their sheer power, the sole exception being the Ampeg Portaflex amps, which were built like a tank. So I was ready, and the RE, who since had retreated to the control room, told me to play something to get the levels right. Via the talkback, a mic used to be able to speak with the control room. I told him that I already adjusted the amp to my liking, but that I advised him to turn the volume of the direct line to 0 on his side, and turn it up slowly. I was, rather rudely, interrupted that he knew what he was doing, and that I just needed to pluck a string, so we could get on. So that's what I did. I plucked the string. At that very moment I saw his eyes basically pop out of his sockets, and him frantically mash a button on the mixing console. I don't know what happened at the other side of that window, but I'm fairly sure that the EB2 claimed the life of two rather expensive studio speakers, the cones being blasted, or at least having to produce one hell of a distorted and overdriven signal that they were not designed for. The session itself was nothing special. One playthrough as a rehearsal, for takes, and it was a wrap. I didn't stick around for the playback, but I heard from the SSW that he had to initially listen to the track via headphones, and not via the speakers in the control room. I received a final mix a few weeks later, but the SSW decided to shelve the song, with it not really fitting the rest of his material. The Gibson got sold a few years later, as it was a bit too valuable to keep in relation to its usage. I now have a cheaper EB3 with the same pickup as the EB2, its output being even more monstrous. I can't drive anywhere without permission? Okay, I'll follow that rule, maliciously. This happened when I was 16 years old and just got my driver's license. My parents had me run to the store to pick up some groceries. I stopped by my friend's house on the way back home for maybe 5 minutes to show him I got my license, and I was out driving alone. It was a really fun moment in the life of a 16-year-old. My stepmom Marian freaked out. We did not give you permission to drive to Bill's house. We told you to go to the store and that is all. I told Marian and my dad that they had let me drive to Matt's house the day before, so I didn't think it was a big deal. They went unreasonable and laid down the unbendable rule that set up the malicious compliance. You are not allowed to drive anywhere we do not give explicit permission for you to drive. Period, end of sentence. Just because you were allowed to do it previously does not ever give you permission another time. Ever. Fast forward 3 days later. My 13-year-old stepsister has been a jerk to me all day, and I'm sick of her BS. She goes quiet for about 30 minutes and then comes out all sticky sweet. Hey Brian, it's time to take me to ballet. I have taken her to ballet 3 days a week since I got my license. It's basically one of my chores. But I see my opportunity to say screw you to all 3 of them at once. Sorry, Tina. I'm not allowed to take you to ballet. The parents didn't tell me to take you, and I don't want to get in trouble. She screams, she cries, she begs, she threatens. She calls her mom and leaves a message. She calls my dad and leaves a message. Just like Steve Miller says, time keeps on slippin' into the future. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to hang on to the bitter end and actually go through with it. I'm shaking, but I know I've got them dead to rights. No call back from the parents and the clock goes on past the start of her class. Stepmom comes home and Tina runs to meet her. Tina, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at ballet. I hear Tina tell her rendition of the story, leaving out how miserable she had been, and they go back and forth. Marian comes pounding down the hall and yells, as God is my witness, you just wait till your father gets home. I had to stifle a laugh because I never really believed people actually said that. An hour later Dad comes home and the TWO of them go running out to meet him and tell him how horrible I was. I wait in my room for the hammer to fall. About 10 minutes later my dad calls down the hall, Brian, would you please come here and talk to us? Well, Brian, you did it. What do you mean, Dad? You got us all, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. Okay, let's make this reasonable for everyone. And they did. They agreed that they were over the top. They recognized that Tina isn't always very nice to me, and they spoke to her about that. I was allowed to have reasonable freedom if I was driving somewhere, since I had good grades and had never been in trouble. I walked down the hall back to my room, my back to my parents, with the world's biggest grin on my face. I am not allowed to drive the rental car. You got it. I saw another MC post about driving and remembered an experience of my own. This happened back in 2017. I had a group of very fun and very nerdy college friends. One of them lived 11 hours away by car and had grown up attending a local Ren fair with their family. Their family was also gracious enough that they liked to invite my friends' friends down for fair each year and host everyone. The first time I went with them there were 4 of us in one little car. Very simple. The second time I went with everyone, there were 9 of us total. Our host friend had their own vehicle by that point, so 4 of us rode in there. Our other friend decided to rent a really nice SUV to take the last 5. I was one of the lucky ones to ride in the SUV. Because this was such a long drive, before we set out I spoke with my friend who had the rental. We'll call her Christina. Me, hey Christina. It's going to be a super long drive. I'm very comfortable driving on the freeway, so if you get tired, I'm more than happy to take the wheel if needed. I don't remember her exact words, but I do remember that her tone implied that she thought the suggestion was the stupidest shit she'd ever heard. Christina, oh, absolutely not, Catherian. My insurance only covers me. Nobody else can drive the rental. Period. End of conversation. I need you to ride shotgun and attend to my every whim while I drive though. Nobody else coming with us is used to long road trips. I'll be honest, I was caught off guard, but also understood where she was coming from. If the worst case scenario happened and I was driving, that would be really bad, so I agreed. Fast forward, we have about 4 hours left until our destination. Over the walkie-talkie, the other car lets us know their driver needs a break. Unfortunately, nobody else in that car has a license. We page back, I'll be taking over for them at the next rest stop. I can tell Christina is dying to take a break. She looks completely miserable. I had kept her supplied with snacks and water, and was very attentive to her song requests. But 7 straight hours of driving is tough. But nobody else is allowed to drive the rental, so I don't say anything. One of the more awake passengers takes my place as co-pilot. I take over as driver in the other car, and we successfully make it to our destination. We have dinner, go to bed, and the next day carpool to the fairgrounds in our host's parents' SUV, seated 6, and Christina's rental, seated 8, along with the 3 extras we picked up from our host family. Christina drove and reiterated to our host mom that nobody else was allowed to drive her rental. We have a full day of fun and medieval debauchery, and then head back to the house. Upon arriving and getting changed into modern clothing, we learned that our host's father's band was playing at a small pub a few miles away. Hurrah! We're all over 21 and excited to do some public drinking with a bunch of other plague nerds. We start to discuss driving arrangements. 8 of us want to attend the festivities. Great! We can all fit in the rental. Christina looks at me. I can see the weariness in her eyes. She says to another friend who was accompanying us, "Wow, I would love to have a couple drinks tonight." She's exhausted. She drove all day yesterday and spent the whole day in a corset and hoops under the hot sun today. She looks at me again. Hey Catherian, do you think you could DD tonight? Cue malicious compliance. Oh no. Christina, you made it very clear that nobody else can drive the rental. I wouldn't want to *CK up your insurance premiums if something went wrong. And so, Christina drove everybody to the show, and I proceeded to get good and drunk nice and fast, so that she wouldn't have a chance to ask me again. She was very sober and very angry, and made me ride in the other car on the long drive back to campus the next day. The end. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.